Welcome to the last night in the series, everybody. Good to see so many smiling faces. Tonight, celebrating the music of Impulse with an exclamation point. Impulse Records, an American jazz record company established by Creed Taylor in 1960. Some of you may know that name, Creed Taylor. Creed Taylor famously had a record label in the late 60s into the 70s called CTI, which had a lot of tremendous hits and sort of ushered in the new age of sort of jazz, pop, jazz, soul, sort of crossover music. But while Taylor was at Impulse upon starting it, he did a lot of incredibly, tremendously profound things. One of the first ones was signing Ray Charles. And Ray Charles produced an album, actually the only Impulse record that Ray Charles would create, which we're going to feature here tonight, a record called Genius Plus Soul Equals Jazz. That record would be one of Ray Charles's greatest albums, would garner him a lot of fame and attention, as it did for the record label and as it did for Creed Taylor. Now, at Impulse Records, a lot of great success to start, and then they signed this guy by the name of John Coltrane. And eventually Impulse Records would become known as the house that Coltrane built, based on all of the records, the tremendous amount of success that the albums had for Coltrane, including A Love Supreme being one of the foremost among them. Now, when Creed Taylor left and went to Verve, he was replaced by a gentleman by the name of Ed Michel. And Ed Michel would also have a lot of success at Impulse Records. He would sign folks like John Lee Hooker, B.B. King, of course, John Coltrane, and then eventually Alice Coltrane. And at Impulse, they really strived to create music that was spiritual, music that was experimental, music that moved the soul and the body in a different way than other record labels. Some of the artists that they would sign would be Sonny Rollins, Quincy Jones, Max Roach, Keith Jarrett, Charles Mingus, Sun Ra, and Pharoah Sanders, just to name a few. Those artists would help define that label's sound. And one of the things that defined that label's image was the look of an Impulse record. While Blue Note Records had sort of their own unique imprint with these beautiful photos and sort of block style colors behind them and interesting, sort of fonts and different character settings, Impulse was a classic black and orange label, right? I can picture it in my mind right now. And that look was all due up to a person named Fran Scott. And Fran Scott is credited with coming up with Impulse's overall design and overall look of the album, and also credited with using sort of these cutting edge, up and coming photographers to take these beautiful photos. So the record label is Impulse Records, and as I mentioned the last 3 weeks, it's very challenging to think about 4 different record labels and the hundreds and hundreds of records that all of these labels produced, and then from those hundreds of albums to think about the thousands of songs that are on those albums and sort of strip that down to a 90-minute show, right? And it's a fun job, but it's a challenging job at the same time. But it is really such a painstakingly difficult thing to do because we want to just play everything. But the title of this educational series is Discover Jazz. And if we're doing our job correctly on this stage tonight, when you leave here, you will be inspired to do exactly that. You'll go out and discover jazz and discover this music. The first album we're going to feature tonight is by an acclaimed pianist, the great Ahmad Jamal. And Ahmad Jamal has had success in the jazz world since the 1950s. Now, the album we're going to feature tonight is actually one that was recorded in 1970 at Plaza Sound Studios in New York, February 2nd and 3rd of 1970. Featured Jamal Nasser on bass and Frank Gant on drums. The liner notes to this album were written by the great jazz historian Leonard Feather. So if you get a chance to read through the liner notes, they're really, really brilliantly put together. And this album features this sort of colorful set of patterns on it. And those patterns really speak to the idea of where jazz was going and where someone like Ahmad Jamal was going in his career. This was an age of exploration for many jazz artists coming through the 1960s, edging into the 1970s, and sort of the breadth and depth that the music was taking on, being influenced by, of course, folks like Ray Charles and all the great pop, soul, R&B, hit makers that were happening in the sort of Black American music space. And Ahmad Jamal, since his debut in the 1950s, had really evolved as a pianist, right? He has this dense, adventurous sound and approach to the piano. His playing is lush, it's very dynamic, and one of the beautiful things about Jamal's playing, particularly in the late 60s and early 70s, is that for those of you that are hip-hop fans, the way I'm a hip-hop fan, right, a lot of those albums were used as source material for some of the greatest early hip-hop albums ever made. Folks like Nas and Common and Tribe Called Quest, and the list goes on and on and on. We're gonna start out with actually an Antonio Carlos Jobim composition entitled Wave that was arranged by Ahmad Jamal. So here we go. The Awakening, Ahmad Jamal. The song is Wave.
For that's a lovely way to be, where all things your heart alone meant to see. The fundamental loneliness goes whenever two can dream a dream together. You can't deny, don't try to fight the rising sea. Don't find the moon, the stars alone, don't find me. Goes never two can dream a dream together. But when I saw you first, that time was half past.
The next record we're going to feature is a classic, one that transcends the world of jazz into the world of television and movies and jazz radio, pop radio. And this is an album that is featuring the great Duke Ellington and John Coltrane. Album by the same title, Duke Ellington and John Coltrane, recorded in 1963. And, you know, throughout Ellington's career, he would be someone who would always work with countless other musicians who were sort of legends or heavyweights in their own respect. And the 1960s particularly saw Ellington sort of connect and team up with a lot of these greats. He did a bunch of work in that time frame with folks like Coleman Hawkins and Count Basie and Louis Armstrong and Max Roach and Charles Mingus. And one of the sort of marquee albums for Impulse as a record label, and I would say for Ellington and Coltrane's, you know, both of them for their illustrious careers, is this particular album. The feel of this record is truly unique. It is truly enchanting. They sort of, you know, run the gamut from, you know, really playful compositions to things that are sort of deeply swinging, beautiful romantic ballads. And this is an album where you have John Coltrane, Duke Ellington, and then sort of filling out the rhythm section are these amazing players who come from both the Ellington band and the Coltrane band, folks like Aaron Bell on bass and Jimmy Garrison on bass, the great Elvin Jones on drums and Sam Woodyard on drums. And Coltrane says of his collaboration with Ellington about this specific record. He says, quote, "I was really honored to have the opportunity of working with Duke. It was a wonderful experience. He has set standards that I haven't caught up with yet. I would love to have worked with all of these numbers again, but then I guess the performances wouldn't have had the same spontaneity, and they might have not been any better." And I think one of these classics is the one we're going to do for you now, one that has transcended the world of jazz into the world of music as we know it across the board. And this is the beautiful piece, In a Sentimental Mood.
In a sentimental mood, I can see the stars come through my room, while your loving attitude is like a flame that lights like blue on the wings of every kiss, leaves a melody that's sweet, so strange and sweet in your sentimental bliss. You make my paradise complete. Rose petals seem to fall. It's all like a dream to call you mine. Oh, my heart's a lighter thing since you made this night a thing divine. In a sentimental mood, I'm within a world so heavenly, one I never know, that you would love me, that you would be loving sentimental me. seem to fall. It's all like a dream to call you mine. Oh, my heart's a line of things since you made this night a thing divine in a sentimental mood. I'm within a world so heavenly, for I never know that you be loving sentimental.
Deszon Claiborne on the drums, Gary Brown on the bass, Tim Campbell on keys, James Mahone on saxophone, Natalie John on trumpets. The next album that we're going to feature, the next musician we're going to feature, is one of my favorites, and someone that I started listening to at a very young age because the song sort of most closely associated with this person is probably one of the greatest jazz recordings of all time, and that's a big statement. But when I say the song, I think you know what I mean. The person is Oliver Nelson. The album is Blues in the Abstract Truth, and the song is Stolen Moments. A classic piece of jazz history, such a beautiful recording. And, you know, I was telling the band actually earlier, one of the things about, you know, sort of studying and researching and learning and trying to hold on to history, right? Because history is very big, it's very large. There's lots of information there. I've listened to this album countless times for 30 plus years. And it was in sort of doing the research for this particular class that I came across and really focused on not the music, right? We think of, you know, Stolen Moments and the great compositions on that album, but the players, folks like Freddie Hubbard on trumpet, Eric Dolphy on sax, George Barrow on sax, Bill Evans on piano, Paul Chambers on bass, Roy Haynes on drums. I mean, this is a jazz supergroup if you've ever heard of a jazz supergroup, right? So, and you think about Oliver Nelson as a tenor player, as an improviser, and then as this tremendously gifted composer, and then on top of that, a tremendously gifted arranger. So this album came out in 1961, and you know, this is a record that is beyond considering Stolen Moments and this album sort of jazz standards. It's really sort of, you know, jazz folklore in a way. This is a song that kind of permeates the brains of jazz players and jazz listeners and has since its release. Writing in 1961, the Downbeat magazine critic Don DeMichael commented, "Nelson's playing is like his writing, thoughtful, original, well-constructed." This album has, you know, won countless awards, but I think one of the most important, you know, accolades for this album is the Jazz Journal writing, this is one of the essential post-bop recordings. So if you haven't listened to this album in its entirety, Blues in the Abstract Truth, please do so. And I think in 69 or 68, Oliver Nelson recorded an album entitled More Blues and the Abstract Truth, which is a bit of a departure from this one, but still tremendously fantastic writing. We're going to continue with Oliver Nelson. The album is Blues and the Abstract Truth, 1961, the iconic Stolen Moments. 1, 2, 3, and... Moving into our last featured album for the evening. I think in looking at the complete lineup of Impulse albums, I think it's very difficult to not, although there's albums that we didn't play, right? We're not playing music from A Love Supreme, but you can get in your car right now, listen, or walking home, whatever you do, just put A Love Supreme on and then listen to it until you fall asleep tonight on loop, and you will be a much better person for it in the morning. I promise you. I promise you, you will be. But I think in looking at the entire Impulse lineup, you can't sort of feature this record company and talk about this record label without talking about the great Ray Charles and this album, Genius plus Soul equals Jazz. Recorded in 1961. The formula of this title, especially with Ray Charles at the helm, the great Ray Charles, says it all. Tremendously gifted composer, obviously fiery pianist, right? Played lots of other instruments as well, piano and organ, drums and a bunch of other things. And the voice, of course, the voice of the great and powerful Ray Charles. Impulse is known in a lot of ways as a jazz record label, especially with a lot of these early recordings, this one, all the Coltrane, recordings, things of that nature. But they broke format occasionally, kind of here and there. As I mentioned, they signed John Lee Hooker and B.B. King and some other folks. But this is one of those albums, that sort of breaks the formula of what jazz records were doing at the time. And Ray Charles, although now sort of known, in a lot of ways for his, vocal contributions to jazz and soul and R&B and funk and all of that great, Black American music, such a soulful, bluesy, and swinging, jazz player at the heart of who he is. And, this was the only release that he did for Impulse. And it mostly features him actually playing in sort of instrumental jazz settings. However, this recording, recorded at the great Rudy Van Gelder Studios in 1960, end of December 1960, features Ray Charles and a lot of Hammond B3 organ in this record, but also features Count Basie's orchestra. And so if you haven't listened to this record, it is one that I highly, highly recommend. The Count Basie Orchestra is swinging. They sound amazing. These arrangements are fantastic, partially due to the fact that you had two great arrangers, the phenomenal Quincy Jones and Ralph Burns, heading up the arrangements for this particular album, and Count Basie's orchestra has never sounded better. And I think very fittingly in 2011, this album, Genius plus Soul equals Jazz, was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. So from this album, we're going to do two compositions, actually. What are we going to do first? Oh, that one. Okay. We're going to do a composition that does features Ray's vocals on the record. It's really, really great tune. I'm going to move to the Outskirts of Town. Ray Charles, Genius plus Soul equals Jazz.
We're all on the outskirts of town. I said I'm gonna move, baby. We're all on the outskirts of town. You see, I don't need nobody always hanging around. Let me tell you, honey, we're gonna move away from here. I don't need no Iceman. We're gonna get me a Frigidaire when we move. We're out on the outskirts of town. Whoa, you don't see nobody ever hanging around. Oh, no. Yeah, James. just like me and you. You know I have a dozen children, and they're all gonna look just like you, baby. When we move on the outskirts of town. Oh yeah, you don't, nor I don't need nobody hanging around. Gonna sing it one more time for you. I'm gonna move, baby. I am gonna move, baby, to the outskirts of town. I'm gonna move, baby, way down on the outskirts of town. For you don't need nobody always hanging around. Oh yeah, oh yeah.
One more time, Natalie John. All right, we're going to get out of here on another composition that is featured on this particular record. And this is one that, you know, I did some research on it. It says it's written by a bunch of different people. I think it's one of those ones that sort of passed down generationally, person to person. I don't know the specific place where it comes from, but this is a really fun composition. We hope you do enjoy it. This is One Mint Julep. Deszon Claiborne on the drums. Gary Brown on the bass. Mr. James Mahone on tenor saxophone. Tim Campbell on the keys for you. The amazing and talented Natalie John, voice, trumpet. My name is Terrence Brewer. We thank you kindly. Have a fantastic evening. We'll see you again soon. Good night, everyone.
Hey everyone, Terrence Blanchard here. Thanks for watching and for your support of SFJAZZ at Home. We hope you enjoyed the concert, and there's a lot more to watch right here, in addition to dozens more concerts available on demand. We've got a great Fridays live streaming schedule coming up. Most of these live streams will be added to the on-demand library within a week. We also have a bunch of new video series to check out. Drop the Needle, where we test the musical knowledge of artists with classic vinyl records. In My Mind, where you enter the mind of an artist while they improvise. The Breakdown, where artists break down a musical concept at 3 levels of difficulty. And Family Matinees, where the Bay Area's best musicians give kid-friendly concerts with a Q&A. Last note, if you dig the SFJAZZ at Home experience, tell your people. Our mission is to bring this music to as many folks as possible all around the world. Again, thanks for your support, and stay tuned.